At least 100 people walked the debris-filled streets of Staten Island over this weekend, all in an attempt to call attention to the suffering that continues as we speak in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. The marchers urged elected officials to, quote, walk a mile in their shoes. Now, it's been now well over 2 months since Superstorm Sandy slammed into our region, and dialogue about the disaster relief here has certainly gone back and forth. But after all the talk, we are still waiting for desperately needed funds from D.C. Now, you remember Speaker John Boehner, he yanked the vote on Sandy relief funding in the final hours of the last congressional session, a move that outraged area lawmakers, including Republicans.
Everybody played by the rules, except tonight, when the rug was pulled out from under us. Absolutely inexcusable, absolutely indefensible. We have a moral obligation to hold this vote.
It is our obligation, not as Democrats, not as Republicans, but as Americans, to make sure that we come to the aid of Americans.
Dysfunction, Mr. Speaker, in this Congress shouldn't result in punishing victims of Sandy in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania. This is a sad day.
And other lawmakers, including Congressman Grimm, called him backstabbed from the House Speaker. Well, since then, whether shamed or not, they rushed back, they did a vote, and they put through $9.7 billion in Sandy-related funding and are slated to vote on the rest of the requested funding this week. Problem is, it's not a clean bill. It's been loaded up with unrelated spending items. If it passes, yes, it has. It will largely rely on Democratic votes here. We've got debates already saying that they want to see some offsets. It's not clear it'll pass its way through Congress. The issue is, why is it different here than it is on a timing standpoint for other disasters in other parts of this country? And two, why does there have to be offsets to pay when it's a natural disaster when we don't do it for wars or whatever else? I'm sorry, and I don't think the people in Staten Island or parts of Long Island, New Jersey care Republican, Democrat, or whatever. Chris Christie was just as mad as Andrew Cuomo. Congressman Peter King was just as mad as Nita Lowey. This isn't a Republican-Democrat thing if you're in this area. I think it's outrageous, and I think it's one of the things that if we have our lights on in our house and we don't really see it every day, we don't care about it as much. But it is now 80 days just about since the storm ripped through here. And if anybody thought you'd be towards the end of January and we'd be talking about this, you would have called me crazy. But
no,
yet they have to fight for money.
I would not have called you crazy. And it is a Republican thing. And Republicans, it's a different political climate. Republicans are demanding, as you report every night, that everything is paid for. This is a philosophy. And I'm sorry that it's happening at the expense of our fellow New Yorkers, residents of New Jersey, Connecticut, and the coastline folks, but it's a philosophy, Richard. They want everything paid for in advance, unless it's in their district. And then it's different.
Unless they support it.
Right.
Unless they support it,
right.
like wars or...
It's the way it is.
But some things are just, there's philosophical differences, and I guess pay-go is a philosophical difference, but I mean, I think anybody, even if they follow this stuff marginally, thinks, you know, how it stops at the water's edge and the whole thing.
Don't you see the theme? It's on guns, it's on the tax stuff, the debt stuff. There is a significant voice in the Republican Party which views government as the enemy, which views collective action of any kind.
But Mark,
and
you are a moderate and you're a fiscal conservative. But my point is, you never, and I'm putting words in your mouth, you wouldn't hold off funding when somebody's house. This is not a Republican or Democratic thing. This isn't. I'm sorry, I'm going to invoke. If Reagan was around, we wouldn't be fighting about this silliness. Yeah. I mean, why now are we fighting about whether or not we're going to appropriate funding to people who lost their homes in a disaster because it's in the Northeast?
In a way, you have to almost feel sorry for the Republican minority, branch of, because they have such a limited voice in this, and the only ones who really care about spending. The president has admittedly said, I don't care about spending. I don't think it's a problem. The Senate is divorced from the problem. They're not even deliberating. The definition of the Senate's job is to deliberate. This almost $51 billion will almost certainly get passed, something there on the order. They'll go through the deliberations. No one is hurting for money right now through FEMA and other payments. And and meanwhile, there are people in the Republican caucus who are trying to peel away some of the clear pork and fat that's buried in there.
Give me a
so
break.
it's going to end up. It may not be
What
51
they-
billion. It may be 49
what
billion.
they
It's
call
going to pass.
pork is stuff like planning for the next disaster. Now, you may not like it, and you may want to argue it's unaffordable, but it's not pork. It is this. You know, you're a warm-hearted man, and you're feeling sorry for these guys, and you're chastising me for calling them names.
I've read
To
this
hell
stuff.
with
It
them.
is pork.
They're
I've read this
crazy.
stuff. 300 million they're arguing about is pure pork. Why not
300 million?
300 million out of
60
51 billion.
So, and that's holding up a bill?
No.
Where do you?
It's called deliberation.
I'm sorry, can we just,
it's called deliberation.
on issue after issue now, the cost issue is being, this PAYGO, I don't believe it as being an orthodoxy in the conservative Republican movement. I think it is the convenient cudgel to swing against programs they don't like or things that will benefit groups that are not going to support them. I think it's the easiest possible attack to attack anything they don't like.
I'll give the benefit of the doubt that I think there's a lot of people who believe that you should spend only what you have. And I don't think and I'm not trying to be on the one hand, the other, it doesn't make you a bad person. Where I do think there's a problem is, as Andrew says, it's selective in its prosecution.
Nobody believes that. You take a mortgage, you're spending more than you
Yes.
have.
Yes.
And there are things all of us
way more
do.
than you have.
Debt in order to operate.
No, but the idea that you can keep doing business as usual without a potential without real economic consequences,
one's
like
saying
every
it.
okay, but there are some who say keep doing the way we are, and I'm not in that camp.
Who said that?
This is
Name
much-
two.
I can name one.
No,
He's got
you
suspenders
can't.
on at the table.
No, you can't.
This is much ado about nothing. It's going to pass through. No one's going to be hurt.
You know what? Where I disagree with you, I know we'll get a break. Well, why I think it's not much ado about nothing is they had to shame him to get back to the table. Fellow Republicans did to get the vote happen. And then secondly, that you got to beg, borrow, and steal to force that you're going to get a vote. And I will tell you right now, it will not come through with the total $60 billion. It'll be a fraction of it because you know what happens, okay? And to me, that this isn't one of these things that I even thought was a political issue. When it happened in a million years, I think I'm the most naive guy who does the show now. I'm always surprised by this stuff, and you always look at me like I'm crazy.
Everything is
I
a
never
political
thought
issue,
funding
Richard.
for
Everything.
a storm could have become a political
Everything
issue.
is political.
It is-
Everything. Everything.
Isn't this what we have a government for? To help us in times of crisis? Isn't that why we have this social contract?
And listen, I had on here one of the closest advisors to George Pataki, who said it's outrageous. And if you remember, it happened after 9/11. He reminded me. After 9/11, they didn't get the blank check in New York.
So when are we going to say it?
I guess you're right.
There's a coterie of crazy people out there who have defined a modern political party, jammed it into a corner, and they don't know how to get out. I said it.
You've said it, and
All
I
right.
disagree with you.
Well, I'm going to give you an opportunity, Mark, to respond right after you come back. For those who saw Meet the Press this weekend, Colin Powell, self-identified Republican here, explained why he voted for our current president twice here and why he's got challenges with his party. And we're going to talk about what he had to say and also where I think the GOP is missing a real opportunity right now, and they have a big opportunity right now. We'll talk about that after this.